Hello team and welcome to another ATB Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. The Ukraine War Frontline update for the 2nd of December 2023. This is the first part thereof. I do the second part later today. I have a football I'm equipped in my long johns. It is freezing out there. They're going to do a pitch inspection, but I'm fairly sure to go ahead. Rugby tomorrow, I'm not so sure for my lad, because who wants to put their face into frozen ground and get it stamped on? But football should be on today, so I have to shoot off. There's also less stuff to talk about because I guess it's a Saturday mornings earlier than I normally compile my data, and there's just less information out there. We'll see if more stuff comes out between this and my next video to report to you. But nonetheless, let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find that in the description to this video found below. 1,070 personnel is still over 1,000. It's still really heavy stats for the Russians. Not great. But of course, the question is always, what are the Ukrainians experiencing? Are they having a hard time? And there are certainly areas along the front line where the Ukrainians are finding it exceptionally attritional for themselves. So always remember that. Although I report the Russian figures, that's because they are the only figures to report. There are no equivalent figures for the Ukrainians. The Russian MOD occasionally put out these figures that are completely farcical. As I've said before, and I'm going to dip into some rationale for this, but the aircraft and helicopter figures, I think, for the Russian losses, as according to Ukrainian general staff, are probably somewhat out. The personnel arguably might be, at least the personnel figures are the least verifiable. When it comes to things like tanks, APVs and artillery systems, we get an awful lot of drone footage to support the claims. And there is definitely a correlation. So even if they are out consistently, because we are seeing, we've been able to measure that in terms of what the claims have been around Avdiivka and what the claims from the general staff were around Avdiivka. And they kind of marry, although it's like the claims and the verified stats, but when the claims go up, the verified stats go up, and when the claims go down, the verified. So there is a correlation between these two. We don't know whether it's like that, or like that, or like that, or like that. But at least they're correlated, so it's not like they're pulling their figures out their backsides. With personnel, it's much more difficult to verify. And the aircraft and helicopters, there isn't a... it seems to be vastly more have been claimed than have been verified. But that might be the difficulty also, that many aircraft are way behind enemy lines, and you don't get to see verified footage of that often until you actually take that ground from the Russians and then see that wreckage on the floor, on the ground. So, I won't belabor that point. So 7 tanks, 13 APVs and 10 artillery systems, certainly less than we've seen over the last couple of days, more than after the bad weather period, or during that bad weather period of a couple of days last weekend. But I don't know. These things will be affected by the weather now. With the variability of the weather, both the extreme cold temperatures and the snow, but also the rain and the mud, and the low clouds, things like that will affect what happens much, much more than, say, in the middle of the summer. Okay, so there will be ups and downs going forward for the next few months. 1 multiple launch rocket system, no anti-aircraft warfare system, 18 drones and 1 cruise missile, 11 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. So fairly average across those categories. I mean, 13 APVs and 10 artillery systems, 7 tanks, although that's on the lower end of the range that we've seen, that is still going to be difficult for the Russians. Now, when we look at Andrew Perpetua, the map I refer to, and go and check out his live streams, are excellent, really interesting stuff last night. Not so much on the mapping, very little to map, very little movement, but lots of very interesting discussion about things like weapon capabilities, production capacities and capabilities of the Ukrainians, with investments from Rheinmetall and so on and so forth. Anyway, this is the list of destroyed and damaged equipment that he's found from both sides, looking at the socials yesterday. And as you can see, there is about a 4-to-1 loss ratio of Russian, maybe a little bit more than that actually, Russian to Ukrainian losses. We've got a P-18 radar from the Ukrainians and a Leopard 2A4 tank. So that those two things will be fairly sorely missed. Radar capabilities, even if they aren't the greatest of radar systems, are a sore loss. Leopard 2A4s definitely won't want to be losing those main battle tanks without the promise of new ones, really. But then when we go to look at the Russian losses, there's an awful lot more stuff here, as you can see. So a couple of multiple launch rocket systems, a number of tanks. So 7 tanks there? T-72s mainly, T-80 and a couple of unknowns. Actually, I've seen a T-90. I've got a video of a T-90M, which is their most modern, their best tank, if you like, being absolutely disintegrated. A lot of trucks and civilian vehicles and a couple of IFVs. So I think overall that is a bad day at the office for the Russian in terms of those stats. Okay, then when we go forward, we can see that, I can't show you much of this, but there will be in the description below. So if you want to check these bits of footage out, then please do so. This is the first loss of a T-55 reportedly, although it's not. I've not seen it on Pepper Andrews' stats yet. I don't think I saw that yesterday either. But supposedly this is a T-55 getting hit. Now, why we haven't seen T-55s get hit previously is because these much older tanks are not brought from those stocks and thrown into the front lines. Particularly, they're used further behind the line, or they're used as indirect fire. So they put them in revetments and then put them at an angle and fire them up into the air as a kind of glorified howitzer. I presume either the Ukrainians are thinking these aren't priority targets, or they're just not near the front line as much as other vehicles. So we haven't seen these on the loss list as far as I'm aware. What we have seen a number of recently are T-90s. So these T-90Ms are the breakthrough tanks. These are they're the best version of their newest tank, short of not seeing the T-49 Martyr. They have there's been a big increase in the loss of these over, I think, last few months. This one does some maneuvering around here, fires off a few rounds, and then moves about 5 meters this way, and it absolutely catastrophically goes up. So obviously I say it appears to hit a mine, but wow, what an explosion. And it almost feels like that's the explosion of the detonation of the munition, but it has to be the explosion of stuff inside the tank, really. But it all seems to happen at the same time, and it is just. There's no way any of the crew are surviving that. So sometimes you look at these, you think, they might feel quite safe inside all that armor or whatever. You're thinking, I don't know. I think you are more vulnerable than just if you're running around on the field. Anyway, moving on to distant strikes, and a fairly quiet night in that regard as well. So there were some Shaheeds sent across the border. So 11 Shaheeds were sent into Ukraine. 10 of them were shot down, so it's a fairly good interception rate. One X-59 missile was shot down. I don't know how many were sent. And although that was pretty good interception rates, I don't know where exactly the one that got through were hit the Shaheed, that is, and I don't know whether the other 10 that were shot down gave any issues for the Ukrainians, but I do know that there's been a blackout in Zaporizhia, and it's concerns a nuclear power plant as well. So another blackout occurred at the temporarily occupied Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. On the evening of December 1st, there was a break in the power line through which the station received power from the Ukrainian system. It's really important it receives power itself so that it can run its, cooling systems and whatnot. I don't know the exact details of why it needs the fuel, the energy, but it does need power in order to produce power. But it's even in its dormant modes, it will need to be able to be supplied with power. And at 2:31 a.m. the last line was disconnected during an air alarm due to a blackout. The nuclear power plant is powered by diesel generators. There is a bigger security threat at Unit 4. And in fact, Tim White says Ukraine's nuclear energy firm says there is a threat to radiation safety in occupied Zaporizhia. It follows a claim that there was a complete power shutdown during the night at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Enerhodar. So that is a worry. Don't know whether that's anything to do with the air raids or what, but an explosion was heard in the temporarily occupied Berdyansk yesterday, so there were still strikes taking place throughout the day from Ukrainian sort of HIMARS systems probably as a, or Berdyansk. No, it could well be Storm Shadow or something, to be fair. Right. Anton Gerashchenko says 2 planes of the Russian airline, and I reported on one of these yesterday, but there are actually 2 that broke down in flight and in the same day and had to make emergency landings. So on the morning of December the 1st, a Boeing 777 with 422 people on board, flying from Moscow to Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, this is one I reported on, had a warning about pressure drop in one of its 6 landing gear wheels. That happened before landing at the final destination. The second incident happened to an airplane flying from Kaliningrad to Moscow, which had to request an emergency landing at Pulkovo Airport in St. Petersburg. During the flight, ground services received information about a technical malfunction of the aircraft. The emergency rescue team was put on full alert, Interfax said. So another example of the challenges that the aviation industry, civil aviation industry is facing given the sanctions, particularly in that industry. So Ilya Ponomarenko, this isn't particularly news. I just want to remind people, especially when someone yesterday was trying to advocate that, why are you having such a go at Putin and Putin this? And I'm like, are you seriously advocating Putin as some kind of moral paradigm of virtue, paragon of virtue? Like, really? Good luck with that. Go for it. I'll give you a platform. Here you go. Tell me how wonderful he is. Anyway, just to remind people, some of the results are almost 25 years of his rule. But it's worth reminding ourselves about this. If I was in charge of a place, and I know I'm a completely different human, and I'm not megalomaniacal like someone like Putin is, and these people who become dictators, they have to have a certain, I guess, sociopathic personality. But I would be looking at what are the problems this nation has. Okay, I am representing these people. I need to improve the lot of all of these people in all the major areas where we are not comparably doing well in relation to all these other countries around the world. So you look at this data and you think, what have you been doing? He's been lining his own pockets. Of course he has. 27% of Russians have no access to natural gas supplies. That's official Russian stats for 2023. This is a country with the biggest natural gas supplies in the world, or near there or thereabouts. 30% of Russian households have no access to central sewage systems as of November 2022. Russia is ranked 137th in Transparency Corruption Perceptions Index in 2022. So they are vastly more corrupt than most other countries on earth, including Ukraine, the country they often complain about for corruption. 20.9 million Russians survived below the poverty line as of Q1 2022. So that is what, the 7th of the population. Yet Putin's key talking points in his electoral agenda for his upcoming 5th presidential term until at least 2030 are gay people and sexual preferences as yet another global LGBT conspiracy to destroy Russia, perpetual and imaginary war with the entire NATO in Ukraine, the exceptionalism and the messianic role of the Russian people in history, improving Russia's failing demographics by banning abortions. And I'm absolutely not kidding or trolling, says Ponomarenko. I mean, he's absolutely right. Like, here are your problems. Here's your list of really fundamental national problems. And here are the problems you are communicating to your domestic audience, your own population. You are disinforming them. You are getting them to think about these bogeymen more than what is going wrong over here. There was that Vox Pops, those older women on the street side say, like, what's worse, your hospitals, your roads, or NATO? And they're like, yeah, probably NATO. So if you think on your daily basis that NATO is a bigger problem than the fact that your roads are falling apart and your hospitals aren't working properly or whatever, if 27% of your population doesn't have access to natural gas in a country with that much natural gas, you've got some fundamental problems, and those are problems that Putin has not fixed, though he has been given plenty of time and opportunity to do so. And he's got the money to do so. Goodness me, he's got the money to do so. So don't come on my threads and splurge your nonsense about how wonderful Putin is. He's not only a moral monster, he's actually a very bad politician for domestic needs. Right, and talking about what a wonder Putin is with his wonderful liberation, just to remind you, this is Mariupol at Christmas time. Beautiful. lovely, incredible. That, I mean, wow, that is lovely compared to, you know, going down Pompey, going down Portsmouth at Christmas time. I think I prefer to go to Mariupol for sure. Oh, but look at it now. The very same building. Yeah. That's liberation for you, peeps. So I know this isn't necessarily news, but it's just to remind ourselves of the news that has happened, of what has really happened to these places in Ukraine. Right, I can hear my partner calling my son to get dressed, ready for his football, so I'm going to be called soon. So, police raids took place in gay clubs in Moscow. Security forces came to the clubs under the pretext of searching for drugs and photographed the passports of the visitors. So already we are moving into this new phase of dictatorial oppression in Russia, where these guys are seen, and these men and women are seen as an extremist organization rather than just a sexual preference. They're an extremist organization. I expect to see them on the front line fairly soon. And then just to add, last thing I'm going to say concerns actually Mariinka. I wasn't full on and like Mariinka's definitely fallen. Yesterday in my frontline update, I was like, okay, according to Syriac maps, Mariinka's fallen. It is a flag on a building. This is the main bit of evidence, a flag on the edge of Mariinka on a building, and that could have happened in a clandestine sort of movement. In fact, last night in Andrew Perpetua, you had Andrew Perpetua saying, I think it has fallen, and then, is it Glick? Yeah, one of the guys that helps him saying, I'm not so sure. I think without any other evidence, it could well be there's been really terrible weather, and it could be quite easy to nip round and place that flag there and then take a picture of it once the weather gets a little bit better. And so I was like, yeah, it's probably fallen. But there's some interesting stuff coming out today that actually it hasn't fallen. So here's Russian blogger Roman Saponkov, and we'll see. I mean, it may have done. Says that yesterday's news about the capture of Mariinka by Russian forces was a complete farce made up by the new editorial team of the huge MASH Telegram channel. Quote, unfortunately, it's too early to rejoice regarding Mariinka. To put it mildly, one unit decided to raise the flag on the outermost house and report on the capture of Mariinka as a whole. Perhaps in another war, the capture of a house on the edge would have led to a capture of a village, but a little later. But in this war, this is not at all the case. As a result, the whole country yesterday rode on an emotional swing, exactly as a population of the neighbouring non-state likes to ride. MASH apparently was bought out and another editorial team of girl designers was put in, he says, turning the channel with 2 million people into the Russian analogue of Trickster. I presume that's a Ukrainian propagandistic site maybe or something. I advise you to immediately unsubscribe from this garbage dump. So that there were a lot of people, a lot of pro-Kremlin voices on my threads, the usual ones, of course, you know who they are. But they were shouting about Mariinka, and it's like, yeah, it might have happened. It's not the greatest value place. I mean, it's complete. It's just complete rubble these days. But yeah, just beware of what's going on, and be skeptical and conservative, I guess. Although it's difficult sometimes when you're reading, and this will happen. Obviously, the Russians will be doing this as well. So it's when you get a sniff of something positive for either side, you kind of jump on it. Like, yeah, because you want it to be true. And this is what is called, wishful thinking fallacy and confirmation bias working. And we're all victim to these biases and heuristics. So we just need to be careful all the time. Now, it may well have happened, or I imagine the Russians may well have made advances. Whether they have taken the whole of it, I mean, it seems rather odd that suddenly in one day they've taken the entirety of the rest of Mariinka, that has taken that long to creep along. So, as I said, could have happened. We'll see. I'll do some research for my frontline update on that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please take care, and also share, subscribe, hit bells, I don't know, all that stuff. I will get back to you a little bit later with some more deets.